Morning in the Middle Ages did not begin with sunlight, but with a decision. While the fog still hung thick in the valley and the ground remained cold like metal, villagers stood silently at the edge of the trail, listening to the only invisible thing that could save their lives: the morning wind. No maps, no markers, no one pointing the way, only the wind. And if it was read wrong, the price was not getting lost, but never coming back. The valley looked gentle from a distance, but to medieval people, it was a place that swallowed lives. The fog could close in behind them in just a few minutes. The wind could change direction without the eyes ever noticing. One hurried step could lead straight into numbing cold, exhaustion, and then disappearance into silence. So they did not ask whether they should go today or not. They asked, "What is the wind saying?" The morning wind was not like the daytime wind. It was lower, slower, heavier. It carried the smell of damp earth, cold stone, and warnings that only those who had suffered loss could understand. There were mornings when entire groups turned back to the village simply because the wind breathed out of rhythm. There were days when they waited for hours in the freezing cold because leaving even a little earlier meant gambling with their lives. In a world without technology, the wind was a language of survival, a form of knowledge never written down, passed on only through memory, through fear, and through the hope that today the path would open safely. And that was only the beginning of the signs that modern people have almost completely forgotten. For medieval people, the valley was not a road connecting two points, but a living entity, with breath, with a heartbeat, and with anger of its own. During the day, it opened itself, exposed the path, and allowed humans to cross in the light. But in the early morning, before the sun rose high enough to break the order of the air, the valley became a perfect trap. No war was needed, no wild beasts, only wind and fog were enough to kill. Cold nighttime air was heavier, flowing down into the bottom of the valley like invisible water. It settled there, accumulating, pressing close to the ground, trapping fog and moisture. Before dawn arrived, the morning wind began to move, not to dispel danger, but to reveal it. To those who did not understand, wind was just wind. But to villagers, it was the first map of the day. They did not stand upright to feel the wind. They bent low. They watched the grass, the ashes from last night's fire, and the strands of dew clinging to the ground. If the wind only brushed the tips of the grass, the valley was holding its cold. If the wind crawled along the ground, the air was still heavy, and the fog would not lift. Entering at that moment meant stepping into a space where direction lost its meaning. A traveler could hear their own footsteps, but no longer hear the world. The elders in the village were usually the ones who observed the longest. They did not speak much, only breathed out slowly. Whether the breath vanished quickly or hung suspended in the air was an answer. When breath did not disperse, it meant the air was still. And when air stood still in the valley, the fog would close like a door. There were people who walked in the right direction and still died, simply because they did not understand this moment. The morning wind also carried scent. The smell of damp earth signaled rising groundwater, where the surface could give way beneath one's feet. The smell of dry stone signaled barren slopes, where the wind could turn a small rock into a disaster. Medieval people did not name these smells. They only remembered the outcomes. This place is safe. That place is not. That knowledge did not live in words, but in the silence before taking a step. Crossing the valley was rarely a choice. It was a duty. Carrying salt to another village to trade for grain, driving livestock to new grazing land when the old fields were exhausted, delivering news, avoiding war, or simply returning home. Every journey carried risk, but not going meant hunger would arrive more certainly than death out there. So they were forced to learn how to read the wind as one reads fate. Not everyone was allowed to decide. In many villages, only 1 or 2 people were considered experienced enough to say the words "go" or "stay." They were not celebrated as heroes. They were listened to because they had been wrong before and had paid the price. Every wrong decision left a gap in the village, and that gap became a lesson that needed no explanation. The valley had another cruel habit. It did not kill immediately. It exhausted first. Headwinds, cold and damp, drained heat from the body little by little. By the time a traveler began to doubt direction, the body was already weaker than the mind. And when reason wavered, the valley won. That is why the morning wind was not just a sign of terrain. It was a test of patience. There were days when every sign seemed right, yet the guide still said no. Not out of fear, but because they sensed something subtly wrong, a misalignment so small that younger people could not feel it. They accepted being hungry for another day to avoid losing people forever. In that world, survival did not come from speed, but from the ability to stop at the right moment. And when you think that reading the wind correctly is enough to stay safe, that is when the valley prepares its next trial, where every familiar sign begins to betray itself and real tension slowly reveals itself. There was one thing medieval people understood very clearly, even though they never named it. The wind never tells the whole truth at once. Each sign is only true for a brief moment, and the instant a person believes they have the answer, that is when danger begins to change its shape. The valley does not kill with a single blow. It guides, then bends direction little by little until the traveler realizes they have gone too far to turn back. The first tension appears when the morning wind arrives earlier than usual. To the inexperienced, this seems like a good sign, as if the path has already opened. But those who survived understood that an early wind signals a larger change approaching. The air has not yet settled, the fog has not yet withdrawn, and the wind is only the advance messenger of an unpredictable shift. There were groups who walked forward believing they had chosen the right moment, only to find, after a single bend, that the fog had closed behind them like an unlocked door. No one chased after them. No one called their names again. When the wind changes its scent, the tension does not ease, it intensifies. The dry smell of stone signals bare slopes, where one wrong step is enough to send an entire slab of rock crashing down. The heavy, damp smell of earth signals rising groundwater, turning the path into slick mud that pulls at the feet slowly but without mercy. Guides often stopped for a long time at this moment, not to argue, but to listen to their own memory. Memories tied to the names of those who had once not returned. Then there comes the moment when the wind falls silent. This is the instant that unsettles even the most seasoned travelers. No wind means no movement. No movement means the fog will not lift. Space becomes flat and blind, where every direction looks the same. In that silence, sound is swallowed. Voices seem to come from very far away. Footsteps no longer echo. The traveler begins to doubt their own senses, and when doubt appears, the valley has already won halfway. But the true climax does not lie in those obvious signs. But in the moment when the wind begins to lie, the terrain bends the flow of air, creating false currents that only those who have lost loved ones can recognize. There are places where the wind feels gentle, yet just a few steps farther, the ground suddenly drops away. There are places where the wind leads straight into a narrow pass, where cold accumulates and does not allow a person to turn back. These traps do not exist on the ground, but in a false sense of safety. Tension layers upon tension as secondary signs appear. Birds fly lower than usual, as if unwilling to cross the curtain of fog. Insects vanish, not a single buzz in the air. The sounds of water, stone, and wind seem distorted. Each small detail on its own is not frightening, but placed together, they form an invisible map of danger. Medieval people did not call it a map. They only knew that if they continued, there might be no chance to correct a mistake. Some journeys ended right at the edge of the valley. Every sign was bad, yet hunger still waited behind them. The decision to turn back was not easy. It meant enduring more deprivation, enduring more doubtful looks from others. But between hunger and losing people, they chose hunger. It was in these moments that tension reached its peak, not because of the danger ahead, but because of the heavy responsibility of the guide, the one who had to live with the decision, whether it was right or wrong. And perhaps the most frightening thing is not the valley, but the truth that all of this knowledge was built on loss. Every correct sign had once been a wrong sign in the past. Every safe path was marked by the memory of those who disappeared. Survival knowledge is not given. It is paid for at a very high price. If you have ever stood before a decision where a single wrong choice could change everything, you will understand this feeling. So, in your view, among all the signs of wind and valley, what feels the most frightening to you? Share your thoughts in the comments because sometimes it is precisely different experiences that help us see the path ahead more clearly. There was a quiet truth behind all the signs of the wind, something that, when seen through modern eyes, many people would not immediately recognize. Medieval people did not truly believe in the wind itself. They did not view the wind as a mystical guide or a supernatural force that decided fate. What they believed in, far more deeply, was collective memory accumulated across generations. And the wind was merely the key that reopened that memory at the right moment. Each current of morning wind, each damp or dry scent in the air, carried no meaning on its own. Meaning only appeared when it touched an old story. A time someone went astray, a name no longer spoken at the evening meal, a path once believed safe that had taken someone's life. The guide did not make decisions based on vague intuition. They were comparing the present to dozens of winters before, to memories etched deeply by fear and regret. The paradox was that this knowledge was rarely taught directly. Children in the village were not carefully explained why a wind like this meant they should not go. They only heard a short sentence, repeated year after year. Today is not the day for that path. No reasoning, no argument. Silence itself was how the knowledge was protected, because if it was misunderstood, the consequences could not be undone. Those who survived being lost in the valley rarely became people who spoke a lot. They became people who were listened to, not because they were more intelligent, but because they had seen the fragile boundary between life and death. They knew that the wind could be right on one morning and completely betray them the next. So, They did not seek absolute certainty. They sought consistency in the memory of the community. When this story is placed alongside the modern world, the collision becomes clear. We trust maps, navigation devices, data updated by the second. We move faster, farther, and rarely stop to listen to the environment around us. But it is precisely that speed that causes us to lose an important ability. The ability to sense very small changes before they become great dangers. Medieval people did not know scientific terminology, but they understood something. Modern humans often forget. Nature does not need explanation. It only gives signs. The problem is not how much information exists, but who is patient enough to read it at the right moment. The wind does not lead the way. It only reminds. And the one who survives is the one who knows when to move forward and when to turn back, even when that choice goes against their own desire. When the sun finally rose above the mountain ridge, the valley slowly revealed its true form. The fog thinned, the wind became lighter and more stable, and the path that had seemed to disappear appeared clearly again. But for medieval people, this moment did not bring a sense of victory. It merely confirmed that waiting, listening, and restraint had saved them once more. In their world, survival was not about overcoming danger, but about avoiding it from the very beginning. The story of the morning wind is not only about valleys or ancient roads, it is about a way of living, a way of seeing the world in which humans do not stand at the center, do not force nature to obey their will, but learn to observe, adapt, and respect invisible limits. Medieval people had few choices, but that very lack forced them to develop a different kind of intelligence, quieter, slower, yet deep enough to preserve life across generations. Today we have light, devices, and speed. We rarely have to wait because of fog, rarely have to turn back because of an unfamiliar wind. But because of that, we also easily overlook small signs in modern life. Very subtle changes in the body, in the environment, in relationships, are often dismissed as insignificant until they become serious problems. The lesson of those villagers long ago does not lie in the technique of reading the wind, but in an attitude toward life, knowing when to stop before it is too late. Perhaps the most worthy thing to cherish in this story is the very simple yet enduring longing of humans across all eras. The longing to return safely, to see the fire burning in the home, to call one another's names as night falls. These are not grand dreams, but they are what kept people standing firm against a harsh nature. And even though the world has changed, that longing still holds its full value. If this story makes you see familiar things from a different perspective, share your thoughts in the comments. Every experience, every reflection can open a new way of understanding for someone else. And if you value historical stories without embellishment, quiet lessons from the past, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you do not miss the journeys ahead. Perhaps at some moment in your own life, you too will need to learn how to listen to your own morning wind.